This is David Splain. He's a governing body member of Jehovah's Witnesses, and he's about to explain to us this big, long, convoluted prophecy that Jehovah's Witnesses believe in that is about to fall flat and wreck their entire theology. So let me explain. In the 1800s, there was a group called the Millerites. The Millerites believed that the end was imminent. It was coming any 5 minutes now, right? Now, that's not that uncommon in today's world. There are a lot of groups out there that believe that. But the Millerites took it a step further by making an actual prediction, a prophecy, if you will. They claimed the end would come in 1843. They even gave a specific day. When that day came and went and nothing happened, they recalculated. They had this Bible math they used. They pulled verses from the book of Daniel, from the book of Revelation and Numbers, and they said, okay, we had the math right, but we realize now there's no year zero. It just went from 1 BCE to 1 CE. So we have to move the prediction up a year. Our mistake. And they recalculated it to be 1844. I think it was October 1st or something, 1844. I don't remember. And of course, that date came and went also, and nothing happened. At that point, that went down in history as the Great Disappointment. You can look this up on Wikipedia still, the Great Disappointment. It was a big deal. At that point, the Millerite church split into 3 factions. The first faction was a group that believed that the Bible math was nonsense. They stopped believing any of it, and they just went on to believe in God, like any other normal denomination. The second faction believed that something really did happen, October 1st, 1844, or whenever it was, that Jesus came back invisibly, and the end, we were in the end times right now. Now, keep that in the back of your head, because that's going to be relevant in a minute. The third faction believed the Millerites were right about their Bible math, but they had the dates wrong. They had the variables in the calculation wrong, and if you just recalculate using different variables, you will get to the actual end date. So faction number 3 believed that they got the variables wrong, and they gathered together and held church services together and all that stuff. Here's where it gets interesting. The founder of Jehovah's Witnesses, Charles Taze Russell, was part of faction number 3, the one that believed the variables were wrong, but the math was sound. And Ellen G. White, the founder of Seventh-day Adventists, went to the same Millerite church as the founder of Jehovah's Witnesses. Seventh-day Adventists and Jehovah's Witness theology were based upon the same beliefs within Millerite doctrine, fascinatingly. And they both went on to start their own churches, their own belief systems. Jehovah's Witnesses decide to recalculate. Charles Taze Russell, he came up with new variables. I don't remember exactly which variables the Millerites used, but eventually Charles Taze Russell, the founder of Jehovah's Witnesses, used the fall of the Second Temple as one of the variables, which he believed at the time happened in 607 BCE. It was reasonable to think that at the time, but since then we've gained new information. We've found new archaeological artifacts that unequivocally and without question point to the fact that the Second Temple fell in 587, not 607, 30 years later. So that alone blows a hole right through their theology. 1874, start of Jesus' invisible presence. 1878, Jesus became king in heaven. 1914, end of the world. He kind of kept moving the predictions. It started out as he believed that it was going to be 1874, and when that one failed, he said, this is the start of Jesus' invisible presence. 1878 rolls around. Jesus became king in heaven. All the way down the line, they kept failing. 1913 actually rolls around, and he said, you know what? I forgot the year 0. There's no year 0. So they changed it from 1913 to 1914. Sounding familiar? He used the exact same math and tactics that the Millerites used to push their beliefs off when their beliefs failed. 1914 rolls around. Nothing happened. So what's he say? We are now in the end times. Jesus has come. He just pretends that it happened. It worked. 1919 rolls around, and there's a new prediction. 1916, Halloween night, Charles Taze Russell dies. Joseph Rutherford took over at that point, I believe. Did a hostile takeover of the religion eventually and forced all of the leadership out. Even banned beards because he didn't want people to be reminded of Charles Charles Taze Russell, who had a big bushy beard. So anyway, Rutherford was a terrible guy, but he took over after Charles Taze Russell died. 1919 prediction fails, so they say, well, Jesus came back in 1914, and in 1919, he finally, after reviewing all of the world religions, because it takes Jesus 5 years, apparently, to review world religions, he decided Jehovah's Witnesses represent him the best. So 1919, they chose Jehovah's organization as the true organization. 1922 and 1925 come along, and those were another couple of failed end times predictions that fell flat. They just kind of sweep those ones under the rug. They don't have an explanation for those. 1880, 1881, 1906, 1910, 1914, 1915, 1917, 18, 1919, 1920. I don't know why they excluded 1919 from this. They just keep going, but if that's not enough for you, if that doesn't do it, let's talk about the second generation teaching. Governing body member of Jehovah's Witnesses, David Splain, on and on and on and on with these failed predictions. And they did another one in 1975. They did another one in the 2000s. I mean, it just keeps falling apart on them. So they've finally come to the conclusion that the end is definitely coming soon. That's the word they use, soon. And it's this idea of the second generation teaching. So the idea is Charles Taze Russell and Rutherford said the generation that was alive to witness the events that took place in 1914 will not pass away. The people alive to see that stuff will not die. They even produced a book that said millions now living will never die. So that's obviously patently false, right? How do they get around that? That brings us to the second generation teaching. This is David Splain, governing body member of Jehovah's Witnesses, is about to tell us about the second generation teaching, and this should succinctly explain to you why Jehovah's Witnesses are in bad shape as a religion. Now, are they going to go away completely? No, not happening. But they're going to have to rework their theology over and over and over and over again. And I'm just waiting. Time's ticking. They may have 10 years before they have to completely rework it. So let's watch this breakdown of their second generation teaching, and I'll explain as we go why they are in such bad shape. Leading into this, as you can see, they're showing a board here, and it has the word anointed. Anointed people are basically, they believe there are 144,000 total ever in the history of humanity. People who believe that they're going to heaven. And how do you qualify to be anointed? You don't qualify, you just know. It's just something that, you have no doubt about it. God has told you, you're one of the people that's going to serve as a king or a priest alongside Jesus as a joint heir to the throne or whatever. That's what they say. So anointed people receive prophecy from God, where normal members of the religion do not receive prophecy. Let's listen to their breakdown of the second generation teaching here.
Would you like an easy way to keep the generation straight? An easy way is to consider the situation of Brother Fred W. Franz. Now, you'll see that he's FWF on the chart. Now, as we said before,
Fred Franz, this guy right here, was, I think, a governing body member for a long time, and he had a brother named Ray Franz. His brother's name was Ray Franz. Ray Franz was also a governing body member for a long time, and he defected from the religion and wrote a book called Crisis of Conscience that knocks down all of the crazy claims of the religion stuff. Anyway, so that's Fred Franz. Let's keep listening.
Now, you'll see that he's FWF on the chart. Now, as we said before, Brother Franz was born in 1893. He was baptized in November of 1913. So as one of the Lord's anointed in 1914, he saw the sign and he understood what the sign meant. Now, Brother Franz...
Now, when Charles Taze Russell reworked the Millerite math, it placed him at 1874, I think. So here's Russell's chronology. 1799, the last days began. He's going to explain it to us.
Would you like an easy way to keep the generation straight?
Please.
An easy way is to consider the situation of Brother Fred W. Franz.
Yeah, Fred Franz, I believe, is a governing body member for a while in the 80s, I think, or 70s. He had a brother named Ray Franz who wrote a book called Crisis of Conscience. He quit the governing body and defected and made a right mess of everything. It was fantastic. Anyway, that's Fred Franz.
Now, you'll see that he's FWF on the chart. Now, as we said before, Brother Franz was born in 1893. He was baptized in November of 1913. So, as one of the Lord's anointed in 1914, he saw the sign and he understood what the sign meant. Now, brother friends,
Okay, there was no sign. It was fake. It was all fabricated. This guy came up with ridiculous Bible math that fell flat in 1914, and everybody else knew it. You can't accept the fact that he was wrong about all of this. So you're coming up with this absurd story to try to explain it away.
meant. Now, brother Franz lived a long life. He finished his earthly course at 99 years of age in 1992.
Okay, well, that's the end of the generation, right? Millions now living will never die. The generation to witness the events in 1914 will not pass away. That's the claim by Jehovah's Witnesses. And he died in 1992. How do they reconcile that? We are 30 years past this now, more.
Now, do you know of many who were of the anointed in 1914 and who outlived Brother Franz? There may have been some, but not many. Now, just for the sake of argument, suppose that we assume that Brother Franz was the last of that first group of anointed ones. That is, the group of anointed ones who were anointed in 1914, who saw the sign, and then continued serving faithfully. Now, we're not saying Brother Franz was. We just don't know. But for the sake of argument, let's suppose. In order to be part of this generation, someone would have had to have been anointed before 1992, because he would have to have been a contemporary of some of the first group.
So let me try to understand here. He's saying anybody who was alive during the lifetime of anybody who was alive during the events of 1914, that's not what generation means. That's what contemporary means. So they're just twisting this completely out of proportion to extend it for themselves. Their prophecy fell flat in 1992. Their prophecy that millions now living will never die certainly fell flat. Their prophecy that this generation will not pass away before the end comes, that fell flat. It was complete nonsense. And how did they explain it? They extended it by saying anyone who was anointed during the time that Fred Franz was anointed still counts. Absurd. Before we continue, I just wanted to mention, as you can tell, my YouTube views have been down a little bit lately. I would appreciate it if you guys, if you start one of my videos, watch it from the beginning to the end, because YouTube bases its algorithm on watch time specifically. So if you turn on one of my videos, try to watch it to the very end, even past the little click if possible. I would appreciate that.
Now, again, we're not saying that Brother Franz was the last of this group, but we're just using this for the sake of argument as a point of reference. Anyone anointed after 1992 would be of the anointed, but he would not be part of this generation. And Jesus said, this generation will not pass away until all these things happen.
Absolutely absurd, dude. I mean, this is really reaching, isn't it? Is it just me? These people are doing everything they can to extend it and give themselves time. You know what? Your prophecy was wrong. It fell flat. You claimed millions now living would never die back in the 1920s. And look where we are. They're gone. You know you can't keep extending this forever, right? Why don't they just completely come in and rework the whole thing? Change all of it. Or drop the prophecy entirely. It was obviously wrong. Why do they keep continuing to try to extend it even further? This makes no sense to me. Yeah, they're making up their own their own definition of generation. Exactly, Dr. Hayes. Making up their own definition of generation. They must know this fell flat. They must know they failed. Why are they doing this? So what they just did, extended their prophecy, quote unquote, by an additional, I don't know, what, they might have 10, 15 years left, right? So I've never in my life heard of somebody being anointed before 30 years old. We'll be generous and we'll say 30. They had to have been 30 years old in 1992, is the point, before Fred Franz died. So they're born in 1962. Average lifespan is 80 years old. Let's be super ultra generous and say 90 years old, right? Most people are going to be gone by 90. That puts us at 2052. That's the year that they're going to have to absolutely, without a doubt, rework their entire prophecy from the ground up. That gives them a maximum, absolute maximum of 30 years from this point. And more realistically, probably 15 years, right? I mean, this whole thing is absurd from top to bottom, and I can't even believe they're trying to pass this off to their people. This big, convoluted, confusing mess of a prophecy. They're trying to pass this off to their people. And it's working. They're believing it.
Very clear explanation
Not really.
Now, I remember when our current understanding first came out, some quickly speculated. They said, well, what if a person in his 40s? Now, I remember when our current understanding first came out, some quickly speculated. They said, well, what if a person in his 40s was anointed in 1990?
Anointed in his 40s in 1990, right? So that's what they're talking about. That's what I said a minute ago, basically. That gives them to basically 2050, and that's if the person lives really, really long.
He would then be a part of the second group of this generation. Theoretically, he could...
Second group of this generation, he says. Okay.
Theoretically, he could live into his 80s. Does that mean this old system is going to continue possibly till 2040? Well, indeed, that was speculative. And Jesus, remember, he said that we weren't supposed to try to find a formula of the time of the end.
He did, didn't he? He did say that, but here you sit explaining a formula. Isn't that interesting? I love it, dude. The cognitive dissonance is off the charts. It's like they're not connecting the dots, that everything that they're saying is completely unbiblical. Like they've gone entirely off the rails with this. I love it to death. And they get these little moments of self-awareness, like little moments of, oh my God, maybe we're doing the wrong thing here. Maybe we shouldn't be like overanalyzing this and claiming the end is going to be here any 5 minutes now. And then it just they forget it all. They're like, no, I think we were right the first time. Absurd.
Find a formula of the time of the end. In Matthew 24:36, just two verses later, he said, concerning that day and hour, nobody knows. And even if the speculation is a possibility, there'd be very few in that category. And consider this significant point. There's nothing in Jesus' prophecy that suggests those of the second group alive at the time of the end would all be old, decrepit, and close to death.
Exactly. So he's poking holes in his hypotheses that are based on absolutely nothing in the first place. Really, the end should have come in the 1960s at the latest. But then the first generation died off in 1992, the very last of them, presumably. But okay, you want to extend it a little bit further? The second generation, I mean, the contemporaries with the first, it should be happening now, like right now, is what they're saying. In fact, it should have happened 5 years ago. But at the very latest, it would be like 2040.
Well, Jesus said simply, this generation would not all pass away before he comes to full kingly power, our Lord Jesus Christ.
You know what Jesus meant when he said that was like his apostles and disciples. They thought it was happening in their lifetime, like then. The problem is they believed Jesus to be the Son of Man. Now, the Son of Man is a title given to the Messiah in the Old Testament, the fabled Messiah. They were waiting. I mean, I'm talking Judaism. The Son of Man is the Messiah fabled in Judaism. And Jesus' followers believed him to be the Son of Man. But to be the Son of Man, he had to have taken political control of Israel as like the king or whatever, the leader, and then spark Armageddon into being. But Jesus died. He never did any of that. He never took political control over anything. So they're like, oh, well, he'll be back, I guess. We'll wait for him to come back. That's why he's coming a second time. What, a second time? The old prophecies say nothing about somebody coming a second time. Why does Jesus have to come back? And didn't he already come back? He died, he was resurrected, and then he went around and talked to people and proved that he was real or whatever other thing, and then went back to heaven? What happened to the Son of Man sparking Armageddon into being? The reason he said that stuff about before this generation passes away is because they thought it was happening in their lifetimes, not 2,000 years later. Absurd.
Therefore, Jesus' prophecy could reach its culmination this year and be absolutely accurate. Not all of the second group of this generation would have passed away. Now, some of you wrote in after the September 2015 JW Broadcasting program and addressed what seemed to be a discrepancy between what Brother Splain said and what was stated in the life story of Brother Franz in a 1987 Watchtower.
Oh boy, a discrepancy, huh? I guess they forgot to fill all the plot holes.
The Watchtower said that Brother Franz was baptized April 5, 1914. Brother Splain said he was baptized in November of 1913. Well, why the difference? Well, prior to his life story, Our publications always said he was baptized in 1913. But in the 1960s, an effort was made to find the precise date of his baptism.
I see. So it was an assumption that he was baptized on this date, but they believed him to be the very last one to be baptized and anointed before the end came or whatever. So they put a concerted effort into finding the actual date. Got it.
And so some who knew Brother Franz when he was coming into the truth were contacted. And from those contacts, it was
Notice how they call it the truth. Do you catch that?
into the truth.
I mean, I called it the truth, too. That's part of the whole bit, calling it the truth. That's what makes it a cult, too. The fact that every word that you use, positive or negative, even the way that you refer to something, you refer to all of it in a positive light, the truth.
Coming into the truth were contacted. And from those contacts, it was assumed that April 5, 1914 would have been the date. Well, Brother Franz was in his 70s at the time, and so he just accepted the suggested date. And so that's what was in his life story. However, interestingly, after his life story, a personal copy of Brother Franz's daily heavenly manna was found in an old suitcase of his, and it dated from 1913. And under the date of November 30th, in the margin, in his own handwriting, Brother Franz wrote this. Sunday, he said, I was baptized symbolically into Jesus' death this afternoon in Chicago, Illinois. So since this date is specifically designated by Brother Franz in his own handwriting in a book dated 1913, that was accepted as the accurate date.
See, they've worked this guy into their theology. This is just weird, right? I feel like it's unhealthy to focus your theology around a single person to this degree.
And so after his life story in the 91 Watchtower, it said he was baptized in 1913. The Proclaimer's book said November 30th, 1913, Brother Franz was baptized. And then when his death was published in March 15th, 1993 Watchtower, that same date of November 30th, 1913 was used. So Brother Splain was correct when he said November of 1913. So there you have it. And you don't need to write in if you're thinking of doing so.
Wow, dude. So that's the second generation teaching explained. It's just a convoluted mess, dude. And how long do these people realistically have? It should have already happened long and long ago. Should have happened 50 years ago, according to their prophecies. But they're going to double, triple, and quadruple down on it and insist that they were correct about it all along. And this one's going to fall flat too, inevitably. What are they going to do when this one falls flat? I am dying to know.